The views and opinions expressed on America's Workforce Union podcast and its digital media channels are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the producers or sponsors.
Welcome to the America's Workforce Radio Podcast, the flagship production of the American Workers Radio and Podcast Network, where organized labor and its never-ending fight to protect the rights of the American worker come first. Now, presented by LIUNA, Laborers International Union of North America. Here's your host, Ed Flash Ferens.
Good news on rail safety. A House committee mandates two-person crews. Meanwhile, union nurses begin a 4-day strike in Maine. And today on the show, making sure our vets get the education and employment that they deserve. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 26th edition of America's Workforce, where we're available on at least 5 platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. We have 2 guests on the show today. Today is Trades Day here on America's Workforce, and we're going to talk about trades, especially getting vets into the trades. Perfect follow-up to Memorial Day. And if you missed our podcast yesterday, I encourage you to go to awfpodcast.com. Had a really, really good discussion with Mike Hazard, who heads the Veterans in Piping program for the United Association. UAVIP.org is their website, and what a successful program that has been. That show archived on awfpodcast.com. Today, we're going to be joined by Joe Sharpe and Steve Betsch. Now, both are members of the American Legion, and we're going to talk about their program, getting vets into really, really good jobs. And talked to Jeff Stouffer on this a couple of months ago, and we're talking about the GI Bill, how it's not the same for skilled trades compared to traditional degrees at a 4-year or a 2-year institution. The money level is vastly different. I know they're trying to change that. And there was a recent conference at the legislative conference in Washington that the American Legion sponsored. And Ben Volinsky, National Director for Programs and Education for the Elevator Constructors Veterans Assistance Program, spoke at it. And he said they're taking the numbers that we are required to give them and using that to cut GI Bill benefits for apprentices. Well, that's a bad thing. We don't want to hear that. And like I said, they're working on that. And Joe and Steve are going to talk about that, the benefits that exist, and how important that transition is for our vets. Think about this. Our vets served our country. We have to do everything possible to serve them in a decent job. Hopefully, a union job where they're going to get great benefits, great pay, a pension. Think about all of that. It's a great discussion with Joe and Steve, and you're going to hear it moments from now on America's Workforce. Now, a brief look into the world of labor. This segment brought to you by Boyd Watterson Asset Management. You can find more at boydwatterson.com, knocking on $40 billion of assets under advisement. And they've been doing this since 1928. Registered nurses at the Holton Regional Hospital in Maine began a 4-day strike today to protest management's refusal to address their deep concerns about emergency department staffing and its impact on patient care. After the closure of labor and delivery services, this was early in May, the nurses there had reached an agreement with the hospital to increase RN staffing to 3 nurses at all times in the emergency department in anticipation of pregnant patients showing up with urgent cases there. However, new management took over at the end of May of last year and is not honoring the agreement to ensure patient safety. So currently, only 2 nurses are scheduled from 11 p.m. to 9 a.m. daily. Tennille Nason is an RN in the emergency department. Tennille said, we have patients, including patients in labor, who come to the ED who require at least 2 nurses to meet their needs. The ED staffing agreement was a compromise, but we felt it addressed our biggest concern, which was made even more critical by the closure of labor and delivery services. Without an additional nurse, who's going to take care of the rest of the patients in the emergency department? This is insane. So the nurses gave notice of their strike 2 weeks ago, allowing the hospital to make alternative plans for patient care. Now, back in November of last year, they held a 2-day strike, and they've been negotiating for over a year and a half for a new contract. Jess McBride, an RN in the emergency department, said, what's inexplicable is that we had an agreement on increasing emergency department staffing after the OB unit was closed. Our local managers understood our concerns, but new management has refused to honor the agreement. By the way, the nurses at the hospital represent 55 nurses there, and they're all members of National Nurses United. Got some good news with regard to rail safety, and I'll tell you, it's a long time coming. The House Transportation Committee has adopted an amendment to the Railroad Safety Act to the Build America 250 Act that mandates 2-person crews in freight trains. The act, which provides over $500 billion to fund federal highways, bridges, and transit programs, now includes new safety requirements for shipments of hazardous materials and increases federal oversight measures over trains. Bipartisan congressional support for railway safety measures is largely due to that derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, 2023 derailment of a Norfolk Southern train that spilled toxic chemicals over that area. Unions, including the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers, better known as SMART, along with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, they applauded the amendment, with the IAM declaring it a major step forward in the fight to strengthen freight rail safety protections for rail workers. Now, with the act advancing from the Transportation Committee last week, it now faces review from several other House committees before it may be introduced to the House floor. So it's got a way to go, but at least it has some good parts to it. And we'll see what happens in the not-too-distant future. You know, I have a footnote here to the settlement regarding the first strike on the Long Island Railroad in over 30 years. That deal, which we talked about on the show last week, gives workers a 4-year contract with annual raises of 3%, 3%, 3.5%, and then 4.5%, along with a $3,000 lump sum payment and full retroactive pay. Now, the unions were looking for 5% in the final year, but accepted the lump sum instead. Governor Kathy Hochul blamed the Trump administration for cutting federal mediation short and pushing negotiations toward a strike, while the head of the Metropolitan Transit Authority, the CEO, accused the unions of always intending to walk out. Interesting footnote there, which I wanted to share with you. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about veterans employment and education. It's a division for the American Legion. 2 gentlemen will be joining us. Back in a few minutes. Don't go away. You're listening to America's Workforce.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferens.
It takes LIUNA to build North America's infrastructure. From roads and bridges to schools and skyscrapers, the men and women of LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, build the projects we depend on. From constructing the Freedom Tower on the site of the former World Trade Center to untangling Washington, D.C.'s congested interstate, LIUNA members do the work that matters. Find out what it takes to be built by LIUNA at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Communication Workers of America. You can find more at cwa-union.org. This segment of the show is brought to you by the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. For more information, please visit bmwe.org.
There is unity and strength for workers.
We are the USW.
We are the USW.
The United Steelworkers.
The largest industrial union in North America.
We represent 850,000 members in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean.
We work in metals,
rubber,
chemicals,
paper,
oil refining,
atomic energy, and the service sector.
We are steelworkers, standing strong and fighting for what's right.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the United Steelworkers. You can find more at usw.org.
American workers are sick of struggling to get by. It's time to get ahead. In the Teamsters Union, workers are winning industry-leading contracts, historically high wages, fully paid health care, and retirement benefits you can count on. Across the country, Teamsters fight alongside our brothers and sisters to secure a better life. It's what we've been doing and how we've been living for more than a century. When we fight, we win. Join us. Be a Teamster.
America's Workforce is presented by the Laborers International Union of North America. Feel the power right now at liuna.org.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And don't forget, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast, AWF Union Podcast. For so many years on the show, we've been talking about veterans and their transition into the workforce. And there's so many jobs available, good union jobs. We want to make sure that transition is happening and happening as quick as it can, especially in the trades. Now, we focused on helmets to hard hats over the years. Great organization that goes back decades. They've been very, very successful. Today, we're going to talk about veterans employment and education, two very key topics here. And joining us, we have two guests. We have Joe Sharpe. Now, Joe is the director of the National Veterans Employment and Education Division, and he's going to be joined by Steve Betsch, who is a policy associate with the National Veterans Employment and Education. Joe, I'm going to start with you. Talk to me a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in this, and I want to really sink our teeth into what's going on. And I appreciate what the American Legion has done on this topic over the years. It's important. Number one, we appreciate those who served our country. We want to make sure they're serving our workforce. Joe, go ahead. Talk to me about yourself.
Yes, my name is Joe Sharpe. I'm the Director of Veterans Employment and Education. I've been with the American Legion now for about 29 years. I started off in our Veteran Affairs and Healthcare Policy Division for about 4 or 5 years, and then I moved into the Economic Division, which is now called Employment and Education. My time was, I'm a 30-year veteran with the Army. The last, 15 years of my time in the military, I was a Civil Affairs associate, and our job was to, when we were deployed to a particular conflict, to help rebuild that particular country. And so my last assignment during the Iraq War was to participate in the rebuilding of Baghdad as far as economic development, getting the Iraqis back to work, bringing foreign investment into the country, rebuilding the infrastructure. And so when I returned to the United States, I felt like that should be the same thing that I'm doing here. Our focus has always been on helping veterans as they transition out of the military, just like the American Legion has focused, since 1919. And with the implementation of the GI Bill, which was written by the American Legion here in Washington, D.C. at the Mayflower Hotel and then lobbied for, the whole purpose was to help the 60 million active duty service members transition back into the civilian workforce by way of education, go into a 4-year college if that's what they needed to do to compete, to go into the trades, build a farm, or start a business. And that's primarily one of the reasons why we're such an economic power now, because we had 60 million veterans going into jobs that provided gainful employment for them and rebuilt the country. That's been my focus here at the Legion for the last 20-something years.
Yeah, that GI Bill was monumental. No doubt about that. We're gonna get into some of the details on that, and it's important that all those that served in the military are fully aware of those benefits. Let's go to Steve here, Steve Betsch. Now, you work with Joe on all of this. A little background on yourself. Let's fill our audience in on that first. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm a Policy Associate with the Veterans Employment and Education Division here in Washington, D.C. I've been with the Legion for about a year now in this role. Prior to this role, I was a school certifying official at a university here in Washington, D.C., while I attended school earning my bachelor's and master's degree. Before that, I was a Navy submariner. I was a navigation electronics technician for about 5 years, from 2015 to 2020. I transitioned out in the middle of COVID and saw the best and the worst of transition assistance program, and really just rededicated myself to helping veterans and finding employment and education if that's the pathway after service.
Well, you got my attention on that one. I think everybody remembers COVID. That was not an easy time for so many people, and here you're coming out of the military during that time. Well, let's talk about that, because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening right now that went through the same thing.
Oh yeah, so I separated right in the middle of it. I got out in May of 2020. I had a really solid plan. I was going to move to DC, go to college, earn a degree using the GI Bill. Turns out it actually worked out really well for me after a bit of a bumpy ride right at the beginning. Finding employment right out of service was hard. There weren't a ton of employers who were looking for entry-level positions right in the middle of May, August timeframe of COVID. Through the GI Bill and using the monthly housing allowance that's provided to veterans using the GI Bill, I was really able to keep my head above water during some of the worst times of COVID.
I'm sure you talked to a lot of people that you were in the military with during this time. How was their transition to your knowledge?
I want to say hit or miss. You know, I have a few friends who transitioned right before me and a few who transitioned right after me. And it really depends on what window you got in and kind of where you moved determined whether or not you had a really successful transition or if your transition had challenges.
Joe, let's go to you, because I want to talk more about the GI Bill. I know the GI Bill benefited, as you pointed out earlier, a whole lot, millions of people that they came out of the military. Then there was the updated version of the GI Bill. Now, talk to me about your experience. You benefited from something different, I understand. Explain that part to me.
Yes, when I left active duty and went into the reserves, I had what we call V. And it didn't come close to the current post 9/11 GI Bill. And that's one reason why the American Legion helped introduce the post 9/11 GI Bill back in 2004. Because we had so many individuals coming back from, our various wars in the Middle East. We constantly had National Guard and Reserve units going back and forth to the Middle East as well. We needed something to make sure that individuals who wanted to go back to school had a comprehensive education bill just like the original. And that's why the American Legion, with a few other VSOs, decided let's have a comprehensive GI Bill to take care of the entire tuition of veterans that are trying to go back to school to compete, and also have a housing allowance and a stipend as well. And so in 2008, the post 9/11 GI Bill, came into fruition. It was a long fight, but we were able to get President Bush on board, the Congress, and the Pentagon to push this endeavor because they could see the benefit of having individuals who are well-educated and who were able to take care of themselves financially as they deployed back and forth to the Middle East.
Now, Steve, you're the benefit of that, I understand. I'd like you to explain to our audience how specifically it helped you.
Yeah, thanks. So when I got out of the military in 2020, I relied for a few months solely on the monthly housing allowance to pay my bills. I wasn't gainfully employed again until September of 2020. The GI Bill was the only reason I was ever able to afford college. I grew up in a small town, lower middle class family. College was really never going to be an option for me. So after service, I used the GI Bill and had my tuition was fully paid for, support of the Yellow Ribbon program at a private institution where tuition was about $30,000 a semester. To graduate with zero debt from a very nice university like that is life-changing for me.
Steve, I have to ask you this. With the high cost of college today, I'm just wondering, are there people, to your knowledge, that are saying, you know what, I want to get that college degree. Maybe I should join the military first, get the benefits under the GI Bill, and then get that college degree. Is that happening, to your knowledge?
Yes, I would say now more than ever in the past. I met a lot of students as a school certifying official who only did, just like me, only did one contract. They served their minimum required 4 or 5 years, got out, and then this was their plan moving forward, to use the benefits that they earned to advance their careers, and through that, a lot of opportunity through college degree.
Let me ask you about getting involved in the skilled trades. I mentioned helmets to hard hats early on. I'm just wondering, how do you see that trend? You're right now. You have to be aware that there's a lot of openings in the skilled trades right now, because the rebuilding of America has been going on for a number of years. Congress has addressed this through legislation. What are you hearing about that transition right now into the trades?
Yeah, I would say the transition into the trades is happening more and more as there's more opportunities through organizations like Helmets to Hard Hats. And as Helmets to Hard Hats gets more traction with the Transition Assistance Program on DoD installations, more and more veterans are learning about these programs and enrolling in programs like these. I think a critical gap that we're seeing is the benefits and programs aren't aligned with the goals that veterans are hoping to achieve through these programs.
Okay, Joe, I want you to speak to that. And what I'm going to do right now is take a quick break here, because there's a lot of people listening to this podcast. We, for 3 years in a row right now, are the #1 union podcast. And there's a lot of military vets that do listen to America's Workforce. And I want to get into some specifics, because what I'm hearing, there's like you referenced here, Steve, it's not fair. There's some funding, especially when it comes to housing, that could be better. We'll address that next right here on America's Workforce. Back in a few minutes, we're speaking with Joe Sharpe and Steve Betsch on behalf of the National Veterans Employment and Education Division of the American Legion. Back in a few minutes. Once again, you're listening to America's Workforce.
This is America's Workforce. More shows available at awfradio.com.
It takes LIUNA to keep America running. Over 70,000 public employees are part of LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, delivering critical services such as healthcare and emergency response, as well as maintaining roads and sanitation systems. Even the National Postal Mail Handlers Union, representing over 47,000 U.S. postal workers, is affiliated with LIUNA. Find out what it takes for LIUNA to keep America running at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Heat and Frost Insulators Labor Management Cooperative Trust. Find out more at insulators.org/LMCT. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, where you could find more at teamster.org. The Iron Workers Great Lakes District Council, consisting of 8 ironworker local unions in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. We build the skylines and bridges along the Great Lakes. With more work than ever before, the Great Lakes District Council is actively searching out the next great iron worker, whether it's building the next Intel plant or constructing a bridge to safely connect our great cities along the lake. So join the Iron Workers Great Lakes District Council today. Find out how and learn more about the council by visiting iwdistrictcouncil.com. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Iron Workers. You can find more at ironworkers.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. You can find more at ifpte.org.
America's Workforce is sponsored in part by Boyd Watterson Asset Management, LLC. Find out more about our investment solutions tailored to meet the needs of Taft-Hartley funds at boydwatterson.com.
Hire union musicians. Call Music Talent of Cleveland at 216-881-1802. Call Music Talent of Cleveland as your dependable source for professional musicians in Northeast Ohio. Union musicians add harmony to weddings, elegance to parties, and uplifting music for all events. Music Talent of Cleveland contracts solo and ensemble musicians as well as bands and orchestras for single engagements. So hire union musicians. Call Music Talent of Cleveland today. 216-881-1802.
Now, back to Ed Flash Ferens with America's Workforce.
And remember, you can check us out on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And when you get an opportunity, here's what you do. Just sign up and receive our shows on a regular basis and give us a rating. Always appreciate those 5-star ratings, so please keep them coming. We're talking about the transition of military into the civilian population, and we've addressed this subject many, many times with Jeff Stouffer on behalf of the American Legion. And we have 2 members of the Legion on our live line today. Joe Sharpe, who's the director of the National Veterans Employment and Education Division. Along with him is Steve Betsch, who's a policy associate with that division of the American Legion. Joe, I want to start off with you on this segment, talk about the GI Bill. There was the GI Bill post-World War II, and then it was updated post 9/11. It still needs some work. Things change over the years, and you always want to make them better than before. I get that whole situation. I just want to make sure that everybody is treated as fairly as possible. I'm sure you want to go in that direction as well. Joe, when the GI Bill came out, I think there was this perception that it was a go to college thing. And, at one time, college was affordable. Let's be honest about that. And it did lead to very successful careers. But as far as the mission of the GI Bill, can you speak to that and how that has changed a little bit over the years?
Yes. The original mission of the GI Bill was gainful employment for those transitioning out of the military, to make sure that they were able to take care of themselves financially and contribute to their communities as well. It was also to ensure that the United States remained an economic power. And in order to have a strong national security, you have to have a strong economy as well. So with those 16 million veterans going into the trades, getting their college degrees, starting a small business, or starting a farm, that ensured the economic development of this country and made sure that we remained as an economic power. The issue that we currently have is, I think too many individuals think that GI Bill is primarily for a 4-year college, which is not what the American Legion had envisioned. It was for gainful employment. Right now, we're trying to rebuild our infrastructure. We're trying to rebuild our industrial base. In order to do that, you definitely need individuals going into the trades. There's a huge shortage of skilled labor. In order to remain competitive, we need the skills to make sure that we can remain an economic force. And that's why the trades are so important. That's one reason why we're pushing this bill, to make sure that we remain competitive and also that our veterans are financially set as well.
You said push this bill. So there is legislation that will kind of do what you're talking about here, that would push more toward the trades?
Exactly. There is a bill right now by Senator Sheehy that would make sure that those going into trades will receive the same economic benefits as those that are going to a 4-year school, making sure that their training is completely paid for, that they receive a housing stipend, money for their tools and books. That will incentivize many of our service members to not only go into the trades, but to complete that program as well, and to help fill the gaps that we have in our skilled labor force. We have about 600,000 jobs right now that we can't fill. And by having more of our veterans go into the trades where they're gainfully employed, but also help the infrastructure of this country and rebuild our industrial base, that particular bill will do just that.
Okay, Steve, I want to go to you. I don't know how much you've seen of this legislation right now. Maybe you can tell us, where it stands. Obviously, we're going to do our best here on the show to make sure it gets to the finish line because, as Joe pointed out, it's just not fair. It's not fair. If you're going to college, you're going to get more than going into the trades. Why don't you explain that part?
This bill, as Joe mentioned, is a piece of legislation offered by the Senate. It's bipartisan legislation with Senator Sheehy from Montana and Senator Slotkin from Michigan. They've come together to propose providing 100% of the monthly housing allowance to apprentices as they go through their program. That's directly mirrored with what a degree-seeking student receives. They receive 100% for the life of the program, where right now it stands, a apprentice receives 20% less every 6 months. So, for example, they start at 100% when they start the program. Then after 6 months, they lose 20% of their monthly housing allowance.
Was this overlooked when they crafted the GI Bill? I'm just wondering. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I speculate that the reason for this is that as you spend more time in an apprenticeship, ideally your wage would increase over time from your employer. And so in an attempt to minimize costs on the GI Bill, I think this step down was implemented to kind of reflect that increase in wages. But I think it's detached from reality from where we are as far as cost of living and affordability for these programs, and just does not match what a degree-seeking student receives.
The unions, I'm sure, are lining up behind us right now. I saw, for one, in the article in the American Legion magazine just about a month or two ago that the elevator constructors were on board. I was wondering if you could maybe line up a couple of other unions, and maybe we'll talk to them as well about this. We want to make sure, like I said, we make sure we want to take this to the finish line here. Joe, can you speak to that?
We just finished up with our Washington conference, and we did have an industrial-based summit where we had many representatives from various unions that spoke in regards to the fact that we do need more individuals in the trades. That there were various trade unions that focused on plumbing, electrical, welders, helmets, the hard hats, AFL-CIO, a variety of education organizations as well. And that was the big discussion, primarily about apprenticeships. Department of Labor, the VETS program at Department of Labor, the deputy secretary spoke, and she's huge fan of this particular bill and trying to get at least 1 million service members into the trades. This is something that's being pushed by the president, and there's a lot of bipartisan support for it. Because when you just look at the military, shipbuilding, that is something that we're definitely way behind in. And there's a huge need to be able to compete globally as far as shipbuilding and maintaining our Navy.
We've talked about that on the show. We're way behind. I mean, China's kicking our butt when it comes to shipbuilding in the world right now. And sadly, that's something that needs to be addressed by this country, and hopefully it will once we wrap up with this legislation. Okay, this is the call to action part right now. And it sounds like this legislation does have some traction. Just wondering what we need to do right now. The American Legion does a great job of getting the word out. Let's be honest about that. I remember about the burn pits and all that in the legislation. It was important that we took that to the finish line. So what's the next step here? What do we need to do?
Yeah, great question. So the next big step for this piece of legislation is it's going to go to a hearing at the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee on April 29th. I believe that is next Wednesday. There, it's going to receive legislative hearing where senators and stakeholders will have an opportunity to ask questions and dive more into the specifics of it. To the union leadership organizations out there, if you support this piece of legislation, I strongly urge you to write a letter of support to Senator Sheehy or Senator Slotkin's office. You can also write a statement for the record directly for this piece of legislation. The other thing I would say is talk about this piece of legislation, bring it up amongst your circles, make sure that people know about this and advocate for it. This is the best chance, I think, to a solution for this issue. There's another piece of legislation in the House that does something similar, but doesn't go as far as this piece of legislation does in the Senate. So we are strong supporters of the Senate bill.
I would imagine, too, that the American Legion will be posting updates on this as it progresses. Can I assume that, Joe?
Yes.
Joe Sharpe, Director of the National Veterans Employment and Education Division, on behalf of the American Legion, and joining us on the conversation of this topic, which I really appreciate both of you gentlemen joining us today, is a Policy Associate with the National Veterans Employment and Education Division. Thank you both. Let's get this done, okay? Can we talk about that down the road?
Oh, definitely.
And that'll be it for another edition of America's Workforce. Coming up tomorrow, our independent labor voice, Tom Buffenbarger, will be joining us. That and more. Until then, all of you have a safe and wonderful day.
That concludes another episode of the America's Workforce Radio Podcast. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. America's Workforce is a production of Labor Tools and BMA Media Group. Find out more information online at labortools.com.